We're reading about the birth of Yitzchak, the first human being born Jewish, born to Jewish parents. Avraham was not. So Yitzchak is the first Jewish child born Jewish. Now, when we mention our patriarchs, of course, we say Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. Did we have only three? Why is Moses not one of our patriarchs? Moses is called our teacher, Moshe Rabbeinu. He is not our father, he's our teacher. But Avraham, Yitzchak, Yaakov, those are our fathers. Our three forefathers. Confusing. Each of them, Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, Isaac and Jacob, each of them passed on a certain godly trait to all of their descendants. When you inherit from someone, they become your ancestor or your patriarch. When you learn from someone, it doesn't make you their descendant, it makes you their student. So, what is the difference between Avraham's way of serving God and Yitzchak's way of serving God? Each of them must be making a unique contribution. They're not repeating or duplicating what the previous generation did. Also, if Yitzchak follows after Avraham, he must be adding something more intense, more significant. In other words, each generation moves us along progressively so that we're getting closer to our goal. Most people think that each generation does less. But that can't possibly be, because then we would end up at zero. So every generation adds more godliness to the previous generations. We are making progress. We are getting closer to the perfection of God's plan, not further away. So let's take a look at what did Avraham bring to the world and what did Yitzchak bring to the world. The Torah mentions Avraham digging wells, getting into arguments about those wells with Philistines. Yitzchak dug wells. He dug up some of the wells that Avraham had dug, but got filled in by the Philistines. What is this business with digging wells? There must be something very significant and meaningful that the Torah bothers to mention, that they dug wells, which wells, the name of the well. I mean, it's like a huge thing. So it's obviously not just a necessity. It's not just having running water near your house. There must be something spiritual, godly, divine, and eternal, because everything in Torah is of eternal value. So one of the things we know about the difference between Avraham and Yitzchak is that Avraham served God out of love. Avraham was the embodiment of the love of God. Yitzchak, on the other hand, served God out of fear and awe. Generally, we think of love as being higher and better than fear. So although God-fearing is a very positive, necessary thing, God-loving is even better. So how is Yitzchak moving us further, moving us forward, if he is serving God out of fear and Avraham served God out of love. So, concerning the wells, what happened technically, Avraham dug wells, the Philistines came along and filled in the wells, and ruined them. Yitzchak redug those same wells, and the Philistines did not ruin them a second time. I guess they were more in awe of Yitzchak than they were of Avraham. The world was basically into idol worship. In the times of Avraham, everybody was worshiping idols. Not that they didn't believe in God. Of course they did. They knew that God was the creator, not the idols. They considered the idols lesser gods. But they knew that there was one God who created the world and everything in it. They referred to God as the God of gods. So why the idols? They were convinced that God is infinite, eternal, endless, and so on, and therefore it would be inappropriate for God to get involved in the affairs of the earth. God created the earth, but God is not a farmer who is going to worry about bringing bread out of the ground. God is a creator, and he created man to be fruitful and multiply. God does not get involved in the fertility or infertility of a woman or a man. In other words, God created the world, but he left it in the care of smaller gods who get involved in the everyday affairs, and God went off to do something else or nothing else, whatever. In other words, they believed in God, they did not believe that God runs the world. They thought it was beneath his dignity to do that. So God appoints lesser gods like the sun, the fertility god, the thunder god, and they take care of all of the needs of human beings. And that's why if you're going to pray, don't pray to God. What are you asking God to help you with your ingrown toenail? That's blasphemous. For that, you have to pray to the toenail god, whoever's in charge of that department, which seems quite respectful and decent and thoughtful. And why is idolatry so wrong? The reason idolatry is wrong is because you're behaving as if the sun has the option of shining or not shining, of making things grow or not making things grow, and you have to appeal to him, to the sun, in order to get him to do his job. Or the moon can shine or not shine, and you have to convince the moon to be nice. And of course, the sun and the moon have a lot of power, and they have a great effect on the earth, but they don't have freedom of choice. It's not optional. The sun shines because that's all it can do. So, thanking the sun, worshiping the sun, pleading with the sun is completely pointless, meaningless, and misleading. And when you go to a restaurant and you enjoy the experience, you leave the waiter a tip. Now, the food does not belong to the waiter. The store does not belong to the waiter. The waiter did not create the store. He's just the waiter. So why do you tip the waiter when it's not his food and it's not his store and he is not the creator? By the same token, the sun is not the creator, but for doing its job, you should tip it. Give the sun a little appreciation, recognition. Not a good comparison. The waiter did not create the store and it's not his food, but he has the option of serving politely or not. He has freedom of choice. So if he does his job, which is not creating the store, just bringing the food, but if he does it properly, if he does it conscientiously, if he does it politely, respectfully, for that choice that he made, he deserves a tip. The sun has no such choice. The moon has no such choice. The earth has no choice as to whether it's going to produce flowers or not, produce wheat or not. So tipping the earth or the sun is completely false and a denial of God's presence in the world and function in the world. So everyone at that time, in the days of Avraham, everyone believed in God. It's impossible not to. It was too early after creation to forget God. Too soon after the flood to forget God. Before I continue with my monologue, where I do all the talking, I want to invite you to a VIP session, a Zoom session, in which we get together to actually have a conversation and discuss all things Jewish, all things holy, all things healthy. So click on the link below and join us where we can have a two-way conversation. Did they know that God created the flood? No, because they built that tower thinking that the earth is going to be flooded every 1,000 years. They didn't blame the flood on God. They blamed the flood on whoever God appointed to take care of the rain or the water or the oceans or whatever it is. But they knew that God had created the world in the first place. Now, Avraham comes along and doesn't teach the world that there is one God. He teaches the world that there is one God who does it all, and therefore there's no need for idols. In other words, he told people that God is very much involved in his creation. In fact, if God stopped creating the world at any moment, the world would completely disappear and be non-existent the way it was before God created it. If God stops creating the world, there is no world at all. So God can't leave the world. He's got to be creating it constantly. So God created time 5,784 years ago. But he has to keep creating it or it'll disappear, because by its original nature, it is non-existent. When God creates something that doesn't exist, he has to keep creating it, or it'll go back to non-existing. So God said, let there be light. He is saying it constantly. If he stops saying, let there be light, there is no light, as if it never existed. So how can you think that God is not involved in everyday affairs when he's creating it every day? That was Avraham's message. God is in the world, not beyond the world. By choice, of course. He's not restricted. He chooses to be involved in every detail of creation. And so when we read that God provided food in the desert, manna that fell from heaven, so, well, why would he get involved in that? He's always involved in providing for his creatures. At that time, he provided it miraculously. Usually he provides it by making the plants grow and the wheat grow and the fruits grow. He's providing us all the time. Otherwise, there would be nothing. This was Avraham's revolution. Not that there's a God, but to know how God works. Now, in every project, when you want to introduce something new, there are certain stages and certain steps. At first, you introduce a new idea, something people have never heard and never knew before. And so what happens? They attribute it to you. They quote you. Avraham was very successful. Thousands of people understood what Avraham was teaching them, and they walked around saying, did you hear what Avraham says? Do you know what Avraham believes? Have you heard about the God of Abraham? But it was all Abraham. They quoted him because nobody else really knew what Avraham knew. Even after he taught it to them, it was still so different, so unexpected, that it was not their knowledge, it was Avraham's teaching. In other words, Avraham imported godly information to a place that had none of their own. Digging a well, it doesn't mean just one spot in your backyard with a bucket. Digging a well can also mean irrigation ditches. Avraham brought water to where there was no water, spiritually and physically. Now, when you bring water to a place that has no water, you're importing it. The water is not native or organic to the place where it's brought. It's imported. How difficult is it to plug up an irrigation ditch and prevent the water from reaching its destination? It's the easiest, simplest thing. You throw in a couple of rocks and that's it. So the Philistines went and plugged up the water troughs or the water ditches and undid what Avraham had accomplished. What is the second stage in teaching or revolutionizing people's awareness, people's understanding? At first, It's a foreign idea that appeals to people, but it's coming from someplace else. The second stage is it's got to become yours. This idea, this information, this knowledge, this awareness has to become organic to you. Otherwise, you don't really get it. Like nobody that I've ever heard said 2 and 2 is 4 and quoted their kindergarten teacher. Mrs. Robinson told me that 2 and 2 is 4. I never heard anybody do that. Why don't people quote the author of that knowledge and give attribution? Who told you that 2 and 2 is 4? 2 and 2 is 4 has become so absorbed into our own understanding that it's not foreign anymore. It's not a quote. It's a fact. And you don't have to quote the author of a fact. When Yitzchak came around, the second generation, he didn't bring godliness to people. He dug deep and revealed the godliness in the people. That's the difference between digging a well in your property and then making irrigation ditches to someone else's property who doesn't have his own well. Yitzchak said, no, none of that. In your own property, dig deep enough, you will find water. And that water will be native to your land. If it's native to your land, you can't really block it. You can't prevent it from being there. It's natural to that place. So Yitzchak helped the world mature in their understanding of God's involvement. So people didn't run around saying, did you hear what Yitzchak said? The God of Yitzchak? Nobody said that. It became their God because he brought it out from within the person. He didn't bring it down from heaven. Now, what is the difference between love and fear? Love is imported. A person who is loving walks into a room where there is no love, and he introduces love. You fall in love with someone who does not love you. So you introduce the love to where there isn't any. That's why love can so easily be lost. It's my love for you. It doesn't belong to you. It's not organic to you. It's me loving you. Well, I get into a bad mood and it's all over. And it's not like, I can stop loving you today, but you still have all the love I gave you yesterday. No, you don't have anything. Hey, I left you with a lot of love. No, if you stop loving me, it's gone. You used to love me? That doesn't leave me with anything, because love is all you're doing. If you stop doing it, there's nothing happening. It's not like you used to give me a lot of money, now you stopped giving me money, but I have the money you already gave me. Love doesn't work that way. Love is not something you can give away. You got to constantly be giving it. You stop giving it, there's nothing. Nothing but emptiness. Fear is different. Fear is judgmental. A person who is loving is usually indiscriminate. A person who's loving loves everybody, everything, indiscriminately. That's the nature of love. To love one person means you've introduced discipline or judgment. Love itself does not restrict itself. A person who is kind-hearted and a loving type of person loves everybody equally because there's no judgment. So why should I love you more than anybody else? Judgment begins with fear. They're very closely related. Fear means I am affected by you. I'm in awe of you. See the difference? I'm in love with you or I'm in awe of you. I'm in love with you is all my doing. I'm in awe of you is all you're doing. You're awesome. So awe means I'm reacting to you. If I stop being in awe of you, you're still awesome. So when you combine judgment with love, then you get marriage, commitment, degrees of love. I love my family more than anybody else's family. I love my people more than anybody else's people because it's mine. But that means you've added judgment. Love itself would not make that distinction. So love is easily lost and easily corrupted because it's indiscriminate. Fear, let me give a good example. I think we've used this before. There are two people who are very generous. I actually know them. They're really generous. On Sundays, they sit in their office, the door is open, and all they do is write checks. People line up who need help, who need a donation, who need, and they hundreds of people file by, and every one of them gets a check. That's their charity day. But they're different. One of them has a policy: whoever comes to him on Sunday gets $100 check. No questions asked, $100. The other one is a little more particular. He wants to know what you need the money for and why can't you do it yourself, and he wants to know what the problem is. And then he decides how much he's going to give. So some people will walk away with $100, some people will walk away with 1,000, depending on the need. The first guy, $100 to everyone who wants, no questions asked, that's love. Indiscriminate. The second guy, who wants to know what the issue is, that's more judgmental. Why do you need the money? Prove you need it. Tell me what the problem is. What do you mean you need $100? Your problem is much more expensive than that. $100 won't do it. Generally, we say that judgment is not a good thing. But in this case, the judgment is a very good thing. So, what is the difference again between the two? The first guy showers people with love. He has no idea who he's loving. Doesn't care. The second guy actually engages with the person. He needs to know who you are, what's going on, what is your problem, what is your need. He actually gets closer to the people than the first guy, and yet the first guy is acting out of love, unconditional love. And the second guy is acting out of judgment, and he's getting closer. So let's in very simple language. Avraham told people God is involved. Don't thank me for the food, thank God for the food. Yes, he brings food out of the earth and he makes fruits grow on trees. He is the... Yitzchak probably took a different approach. He would sit down with a person and say, who do you think makes the wheat grow from the ground? What do you think? What do you believe? That the sun does it by itself? Figure this thing out. Think it through. In other words, Yitzchak was plumbing the person's own intelligence and sensitivities to reveal within the person's conviction, the person's understanding, and the person's sensitivity. Like the second guy giving out the charity. Who are you? What do you need the money for? Are you sure you need $100? Maybe you need more. Maybe you need less. By the time Yitzchak inspired a person, it was never going to go away because it had become the person's way of thinking, the person's experience. Much deeper and therefore more permanent. So even the people who Avraham already inspired, but they lost the inspiration, it got plugged up. Yitzchak reopened that inspiration and then it never got plugged up again. Because he brought out the godliness within each person. He didn't import godliness to the person. But you got to go through those steps. A kindergarten teacher doesn't ask the students for their opinion. Because if he did, he would ruin them for life. They'll grow up thinking they really have an opinion, or that they're entitled to an opinion, and then you get these spoiled brats who are impossible. So no, you don't ask a kindergarten kid, what do you think that is? No, you say, that's a tree. Don't make the kid crazy with his own theories of, that's a tree. That's a chair. That's your mommy. You don't talk to your mommy like that. Just the facts. But as a child gets a little older, then you revisit those same principles. To a 10-year-old, you say, Is that really the way you should talk to your mother? Now, you're cultivating it within the child rather than informing the child. That's how things develop. God needs to become organic to the world, not an imported faith, not a religion. So Yitzchak doesn't get as much attention as Avraham in the Torah. Very little is said of Yitzchak compared to what is said about Avraham. And that's because he was no longer the center of attention. The people he educated had their own conviction now. So people didn't say the God of Yitzchak. Yitzchak made it their God. If you enjoyed this conversation or this topic, and you're looking for more information, or you want to hear it again from another angle, there is a way to do that. And that is in this book. It's all there. Order it from Amazon. You can read it, reread it, and share it.